post the recording from our last Free for All Friday, which was the one on September 27th. We just posted it today. Um, so if you know anybody that looks at those things afterwards, they can do that. They can look at that now. So thank you, Karen. No, anybody got any idea what hosta that is? It's one of the large leafed, deeply ribbed hostas that I know. And it turns a beautiful amber color in the fall. Not all the hostas do that. So many of the hostas just just kind of fade away. It gets cold enough that they lay down flat and then they're done. Um, hey Chris, saw Chris yesterday. Yesterday wasn't that fun? Everybody, we had what, maybe 10 people come to our neighborhood garden meeting, and where we go to someone's yard. We meet in someone's yard each once a month. We don't go inside. We don't have refreshments or anything. We just walk around the yard and talk about what they're doing right now, what questions they have. And last night, there were probably 4 different conversations going on. Everybody talking about some plant or other. It was a little like a cocktail party, where you could walk around and get in and out of different conversations. These people were talking about whether that euonymus growing up the tree was a good idea. Somebody else was looking for information on the box tree moth, which we did not find there. And we sowed some wildflower seeds, put them into clean sand and sowed wildflower seeds and talked about that. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Talking to gardeners is just fun. I wish sometimes that there was a way that we could swap off gardening like we do at the library or for the garden club, where whenever you go out, there's somebody that can work with you. And then maybe for half the day, you can go to their house and work side by side. So there's someone to talk to who cares when you say things like, look at that, or do you believe what this plant has done? Or I didn't we weed this out already? I was I was taking a package over to the neighbor's house. It got delivered to our house instead of her house. And I needed to get back inside. I'd done my usual thing of having 10 spare minutes. So I put about 15 minutes worth of things to do into that 10 minutes. So I was hustling back and I looked down and there was a whole little group of baby pokeweeds with, 4 or 5, 3 or 4 sets of leaves, which is dangerous. It means the root is, especially this time of year, the root's going to be long enough to hang on, and the top is going to be ready to separate from the bottom. So you got to be careful when you pull them. So I ran back and got a fork and took them out. I thought, this is really silly. I'm taking out 5 pokeweeds. There's probably 500 of them someplace in the garden, but it feels good to just pull out a few things and say, that's done. Okay, I think we got a couple of minutes. We'll wait until we're official time to start. Hi, Elizabeth.
Well,
You got me. Hello, Stephen.
hello there. So, yeah, you got it recording, right?
Only because Karen reminded me.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I'm surprised you're not wearing your Detroit Tigers hat. Don't you be
I
wearing
don't
it?
wear that one very often because it doesn't quite fit.
Oh, okay.
Ever since I lost that one in Holland, in the Netherlands,
That
that
was that was so terrible to know that it was right there. It was right on the other side of the security
you
gate.
could
We were
see
going
it.
to have to go out and come back in, and there was no way we'd make it back in time for our flight. And watch the hat go down the belt and disappear forever.
Somebody's got a really nice Detroit Tiger hat.
Who?
It's old now.
Oh, you mean whoever? That's kind of like my good grafting knife. I've had my grafting knife in my briefcase and forgot it was in there. And of course, they found it as I went through security. And I looked. I told them. I said, please find a gardener to give that to it. That's such a good knife. It's just, but they tossed it, and you could see it was a whole bin full of. I bet all that stuff just gets thrown out.
One of the thing about it was a away cap, so it had the orange D, and at least another one's like orange.
Oh, true, true. That was the time we were there when the World Cup was going on and
Yep.
Amsterdam was playing. Yeah, they were crazy people then.
Yeah.
Crazy
The
guys.
Super Bowl is crazy. Huh.
I'm going to just make sure that anybody who is here who hasn't, I don't see new names, but just in case
I
anybody,
haven't noticed.
yeah, just in case anybody doesn't know, we keep the microphones muted and the cameras off. And all you have to do is chat your question in by opening the chat button, or you can raise your hand. Um, so microphone off, microphone slash, video slash. And if you open participants, there might be a raise your hand control there or in reactions, and then you could talk. Steve is back with me now, full voice. I'm not sure that he'll be singing or anything, but nice to have him back.
I wish I had my dad's voice sometimes when I'm singing in the shower.
I bet if you'd taken the pastor's wife, the choir director's uh, request seriously, I bet if you'd started as a kid, you'd have a nice singing voice.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, but you can chat your questions or you can raise your hand. So, Steve, do you
Welcome to Free for All Friday. This is our 21st
have
one.
come of age now where we're welcoming everybody to come celebrate growing and cultivate problem solving. We're at gardenataz.org. I'm Janet McConovich.
I'm Stephen Nicola.
That's us on a better day. Where the heck are we? Who's got that?
Julie's.
Oh,
Julia and Eric's.
yeah, yeah. Um, and our website is there for you to use and for us to post things uh, like the articles that we've written in various places, or on our Fridays page. We now have it worked out that should we forget ever again to send out an invitation reminder to you with a link on it. The link is there on the Fridays page. So if you ever didn't get a invitation or you wanted to tell someone who's not already on our mailing list to come to this, then just tell them to click our Fridays page and they can click that link and that'll take you to the meeting. I almost clicked it just now. Um, and I'm opening this up to questions. We have some things set up, but would love to hear if you've got any questions or any comments, anything that you've seen or done. Talking to a friend down in South Carolina who is regretting not having fall color like they have up here, at least not down on the coast. They got wet in Helene, but not anything terrible happened, unlike some of our friends up in the corner of the state that I'm kind of afraid to call. I'm sure their garden washed all out. They're at the top of the hill, but all that water running down. Water is a very powerful thing. Remember when we were up north in Houghton Hancock, Steve?
In 2018, when they had that 45-minute rainstorm that was it just washed out roads, bridges, culverts.
Yeah, I think they got 15 inches of rain in 45 minutes, something like that.
11, I thought, but even
Yeah.
so,
And both cities are on hills coming down to the Portage Canal. And yeah, so I know what it must look like up where
I
Linda.
would I was standing in the trout stream holding a 6-foot pole up and was barely touching where the grass was stuck in the trees in the woods. So that's how full Schlotz got.
The debris was 6 feet over your head.
Yeah,
Wow.
and standing in the stream, which Schlotz only goes up to about my knees to waist at the most, and
Water is so
that's
powerful.
they had to change the fishing rules and everything. So
Oh, well,
no questions so far in chat.
yeah, so we'll work on the things that we brought here. I just call it butterflies in the bank. Maybe you want to be a little bit less tidy as you do your fall gardening, because this, for instance, uh, Corey sent this picture to us. He said, "What? Well, I'm surprised to see this. That's a getting ready to pupate black swallowtail caterpillar. So it will shed that skin. It's already in a sea and attached itself. I can't quite see it, but I
I
think
think I see it right there.
the thread, yeah, it's made of.
Right there, there's that white mark that looks like the bark goes right up. Oh, I'm pointing, and
There we
my
go.
pointer
There we
doesn't
go.
show up on your
You're right.
screen.
There's a silk pad that's holding the one end, and on the other end, there's a little silk thread over there. So it's going to shed that skin and be go through the winter as a chrysalis. And that's what they do. They crawl away from the dill or the Queen Anne's lace or the parsley that they were eating, and they attach themselves to something. And as long as it's cold, they remain in that chrysalis. Once it starts warming up in the spring, the maturation, the growth will stop, will finish, and they'll come out as the first generation of black swallowtail butterflies. Some of the butterflies do overwinter in chrysalis like that. Some of them, like the box tree moth, I understand, overwinters as a caterpillar. So does what's the one that everybody sees in the garage all the time with bands on it? Woolly bears. Um, some of them migrate, like the monarch does, and I understand that some of the painted ladies move south and then overwinter as chrysalis. I'm not sure if we're in their area, but this was in the wood pile. Well, I can't call it a wood pile. Most people have a place where you throw branches. I'm busy. I need to get it off of the lawn. A branch came down off a tree, so you have a place where you just kind of pile up branches. He was cleaning out where the branches are. I said, keep that. Keep that chunk of wood. Um, or if you're careful with an X-Acto knife, you can loosen that silk pad and put it in a jar or something over the winter. Just remember to open the jar in the springtime. I've occasionally kept chrysalises over the winter. One of them was a polyphemus moth, and then I forget to open that up early enough. I close them because I don't want the mice or chipmunks to get in and eat them. But if you don't open it, then they emerge and they die inside the jar, which is a sad thing to see.
All right.
So, but
Carol has a question. This week I dug an area that had myrtle, Canada goldenrod, and yucca. How
oh
long should
boy,
I wait to plant things in it? Should I put down newspapers, cover with mulch, and wait? If so, how long should I wait? Or I don't have to wait to plant other things? I ask because all three of those plants are big pains.
yes, they are. Um, if you are confident that you've done very well, you can get Canada goldenrod and myrtle out by digging, and then you can plant right away, as long as you keep coming back and checking, because any little piece you left might come up and as in the rain garden at the library. Priscilla dug out the goldenrod that had the spreading goldenrod, Canada goldenrod that had gotten in there. And we didn't want that because it gets into everything. So she dug it out, and probably we have to be careful digging in our rain garden because there's irrigation lines just below the surface. There are big irrigation lines for the library. So a little couple of little pieces broke off, and give them a month and they were bigger and coming up. So we had to go in afterwards and be able to recognize them even not in bloom. And the myrtle will almost certainly have rooted itself beyond the area that you dug, and those rooted pieces underneath the ground will find their way back in. So you do have to watch for it. I'm still pulling some myrtle out that I dug out 5 years ago as my first clearing of the beds here that were full of myrtle. The yucca, though, you can dig all you want to dig, and even a little piece of yucca, I'm thinking that it may have been 10 years at a client's garden where I dug out yucca that I couldn't dig it all out. It obviously had some roots that had placed themselves in among the arborvitae hedge roots too, and it just kept popping back up. So I had to keep breaking it. But you can plant right away, just as long as you know to keep patrolling for those things that might start back up in there. It's a long answer for a short question. Sorry about that.
Mm. Michelle has a question. What is the bug that is going to attack red maples? Any idea when it might get to Michigan? Is it wise for the MBA to offer red maple saplings?
The um the long Asian longhorn beetle is what I know of that's going to be in the maples. It's already in Ontario and in Chicago, but it doesn't appear to be moving real quickly. It was bad, and Chicago did a pretty good job. They took down a lot of trees and gave themselves a lot of publicity and told people about it, so people were watching for it. It's also not as fast multiplying as emerald ash borer or box tree moth. If there's something else, I don't know about it yet, but if somebody has heard of something, let me know what the name is and I'll look it up. Is it wise to offer red maple saplings?
Yep.
People like red maples. I mean, they love the color of the maple, and there's a whole bunch of them already. Adding some more it doesn't seem to me to be a big deal. I wouldn't want to see a neighborhood put all red maples along their street, as I wouldn't like to see any monoculture of trees, but certainly not red maples. But one here and there, and the way that the Beekeepers Association sells them, they end up one here or there. We don't have a beekeeper in every house. So I think it'd probably be all right.
Carol says she's sure she didn't get all the yuck. Pretty sure that she didn't get all the yucca root
I
with
I can tell you that
exclamation points.
I can tell you that nobody does. What we think is
Nope.
the root is the stem of that plant. We're looking at the leaves up on the top. We're looking at the top of a stem, and you have to go down feet to get to the actual root. So I'm sure you should, I'm sure you didn't, but you can at least watch for it. And that doesn't come up that quickly. Diane says we love your long answers. Well, thank
Yep.
you. But don't encourage me because I certainly can go on. Let's see. Is
At
that
least he doesn't go off on tangents very often.
well, I try
I
not.
said very often.
Okay.
A
Let me
quick
think.
question, Diane. Can I use potting soil from my flower and tomato pots this year to in a large low spot in the yard?
You can use potting mix to do that kind of thing, but you have to remember that potting mix, most of them, have no soil in them. They're all bark and peat, which means it's all organic matter and it's all going to, over time, degrade and you'll have a hollow again, a depression again. So I'm not sure that that's the best thing to put in there, but if it's an area that's depressed, low, got some low spots and it's ground cover, they would certainly grow back into that area. I want to get a couple of other quicker things here. Take
Go
a
to pollen. Yeah.
whoops. Oh, I clicked the wrong thing, didn't I again?
Yes. Go to pollen because Elizabeth has a question.
Okay. Well, this was fun. That it came in just at the right time. Pollen fall. Um, it's a normal thing that happens and something that Elizabeth asked about, but it led me to pollen explosion, which is not so common. So Elizabeth brought in a bouquet of Jerusalem artichoke flowers, and when she turned around, they had just dropped all their pollen. Lilies do it. All the plants do it. Pollen is a living part of the plant, and just like the petals on a flower, pollen will age and fall off. It can also dry and fall off as petals do. Um, so it's going to happen, and that's why the florists take the stamens off of lilies. It's one of the things you do to get a lily ready to put into a bouquet is you clip off the stamens so that you don't end up with yellow pollen or orange pollen staining some nice tablecloth. So that's common. The pollen is grown, matures, and if it's not used, it falls off. And the falling part of it has more to do with most of the aster family. The pollen is heavy and it makes its way from one plant to another, carried on an insect. So it's heavy, it's going to fall, whereas some pollen might dry in place because it's windborne pollen that doesn't have much weight to it and it might stay on the plant. But while looking around for what other reasons pollen might fall, I found an article, a fairly new journal article. Someone was looking at pollination of a particular, I think it's an orchid, it doesn't really matter, a particular flower. They found that if they took a hummingbird skull, so they have a skull of a hummingbird, because the hummingbird is the pollinator for this plant, and put the skull, inserted it as if the beak was a live hummingbird going in, that the pollen on the plant would forcefully eject like little missiles. It'll come out and knock any pollen or a lot of the pollen that might already be stuck on the hummingbird's head, knock that pollen off and replace it. So that this flower has found a way to outcompete its other flowers. And I thought that was pretty cool. But in order to make it happen, they needed something that was just like the pollinator. So had this little skull and they were putting it inside the flower. I couldn't find the picture. I did see one picture, but I couldn't retrace my steps to find the picture to show you. But I thought that was pretty cool. Exploding pollen, artillery pollen. Okay, what else have we got, Steve?
Suzanne is saying she's been clearing her son's yard of many years of buckthorn, some maybe 8 to 10 inches in diameter,
Uh,
and have been applying powder form of stump kill, chips, glyphosate,
that's the fate. Uh-huh.
For many, for many, for the many small buckthorns that have begun to sprout again, will the gypsylphate spray work against them so we don't have them back in the spring?
Um, it, Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, and now the other things that can use it since Roundup has lost its patent and is in all kinds of things. Glyphosate on its own isn't really terribly effective against fast-growing woody plants. It has to be absorbed into the leaf for the most part. To a certain extent, if it builds up in the soil, it can get into the roots and cause some damage, but it generally has to go through the leaf. So if you're using it in the fall, it's not going to do anything to the tree now. You usually on trees like buckthorn, we had a place kind of like this on the corner of a client's property, a wide easement area that she was in charge of. And it had native dogwoods in it, flowering dogwoods and pagoda dogwoods, but it also had a whole lot of buckthorn in it. And we didn't want to mess up the roots of the dogwoods. We wanted those to stay there. So we were cutting and painting those trunks. If you use the full strength stump, not stump killer, brush be gone. So use a kid's tooth paintbrush and dip it right into the container without having diluted it with water. And within 15 minutes of making the cut, paint that on the cut surface. Then it generally gets absorbed into the plant and kills it. You end up with little stumps, so try to cut them low to the ground. But that pretty much works. On the bigger buckthorns, we like to try to dig them out because that big old stump stays there what seems like forever, but you could at least kill it if it's not in the way. Um, we found an interesting thing about buckthorns when we were clearing at the Detroit Zoo, because the corner that we first started our garden in, which is now underneath a huge number of hundreds of yards of soil making hills in the Wolf exhibit. But when we were clearing it out, it had been 20 years abandoned and it was full of milkweed and thistle and buckthorn. And the buckthorn had been cut repeatedly. The zoo staff would come in once in a while and just cut down that corner to keep it looking neat. The more you cut buckthorn, the harder it becomes to dig it out because the more it develops a denser root system at the surface. But when they are allowed to grow without disturbing them, they come out of the ground pretty easily. But we had to do a lot of digging to get a couple of stumps out. There were two of us doing most of that digging back then, and it was a lot of work.
Yes, Suzanne says they're drilling holes into the stump. Michelle has another suggestion, another way to work on buckthorn. Wrap black plastic around the stump and put a large can over and down into the ground, thus blocking out all the light. It takes a couple years, but it does stop that growth.
Yeah, that's one way to do it because they're not going to sucker off the roots. They're
Yeah.
going to come out through the trunk. You don't have to drill holes into the stumps to put a herbicide on a woody plant. It's the sapwood and the cambium are going to transmit that stuff. So
That's
making holes doesn't increase the amount that gets into the stump.
And that's why you do it within 15 minutes, so it's still active.
Right, while those cells are
Yeah.
still have a metabolism.
Yeah. Sue is asking if I have grubs in my lawn, can I pull up all the dead grass spots and add compost and grass seed?
Sure, but if you have grubs, you know that the grubs are in the ground over the winter, and all the while that the ground is not frozen, the grubs are eating roots of plants. So if you start new grass seed there now, it's going to be attacked by the grubs that are there. So you might be better off to put something down that's going to kill the grubs. They're much easier to kill now than to kill in the springtime, or to wait until after they hatch out in May or June and start a new grass there. But I need to know that you actually have a large number of grubs there to find that that would be an impediment to starting grass. If there's just a couple of grubs here and there, if it's a south-facing slope it's got the double stress of some grub damage and getting heated up and dried out, then maybe you could get grass started there if you kept it moist enough.
Yeah. Nancy is also saying something probably a skunk question mark, has been digging up our lawn for grubs or worms. How do we stop it from digging?
And Steve and I
Oh,
don't. We just say thank you, coming
yeah.
from the rest of them, because if it's a skunk, and you can tell it's a skunk if you go out or look out at about 2 in the morning, because the skunk will work through the night. Skunks are really meticulous. They'll go into an area of a square yard and they'll dig every grub they can smell out of the ground. Whereas some animals are a little more squirrely. It's not squirrels. Squirrels don't eat grubs, but they'll just go one here and one there. Sandhill cranes are good. Sandhill cranes are awesome insect pickers.
Yeah.
So are starlings. If they're little bitty holes, lots of little bitty holes, that's the starlings getting your sod webworm and your grubs out. But you need to kind of figure out what it is and maybe just say thank you, because if they take all the grubs out, then you can just spread some top dress with some sand and put some grass seed down and you're fine. They'll stop digging once they've got all the grubs out of there.
Nancy asking, is it okay to put down grub killer now? I can't remember if you said something.
You can put grub killer down now. It would have been better a month,
Two
5 months,
months almost
but
now.
because now the soil is cooling, the grub's metabolism is slowing down, and they're not going to absorb as much of that stuff. And if we start getting rains, if we ever start getting rains, that would be nice out there, by the way. If we ever start getting rains like we're supposed to in the fall, it'll rinse it out of the soil before the grubs actually ingest it. But it can do some good. You might want to put some beneficial nematodes out there, because there are some beneficial nematodes you can put out there, and they like the cool, moist, and to eat grubs that have no defenses.
Nancy indicates she lives with a grass lover, by the way. And so it's a,
I like grass too.
yeah, we found out in our first house how when we made the whole front yard uh, all garden, that how important lawn is as a frame, as a just a pause, a refresher,
And a working
everything.
surface, a place to throw your
Yep.
stuff out from the garden onto. So I do like lawn. I just don't like trying to grow a monoculture of a plant that doesn't really belong here over that big an area, because it takes constant work to keep it going. Um,
A lot of work.
yeah, it probably is skunks that are doing the digging, and you don't have to have a lot of grubs to have a skunk find them. They find wasps' nests. I mean, what are the wasps that I'm thinking of, Steve? The ones that
Bees,
no, not bees, the yellow
well, the
jacket.
yellow jackets.
Yeah, they'll find what people call ground bees. They'll dig those up. They'll dig up some of the solitary bumblebees. So they can smell stuff.
You have to remember to change the question picture once in a while.
I should give you the controls so that you can do this. You're much better at doing it than I am. That's a nice oxalis in there with that golden bleeding heart.
Well, then it'd be really tough in the same room to try to, yeah, well,
Yeah.
maybe we do it in the, no, Sonia's during the webinar, makes it a lot easier.
Okay, well, we'll just go in order here.
Yep.
Expect things to fall in the fall. There are some things that fall that we don't expect to fall, and then there are the ones that are the head scratchers. Um, right now, pine needles and acorns are big layers in people's yards. Great. Well, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, the oaks had a banner year. The pines shed their 2-year-old needles each fall. They came down quickly this year. And when there's a lot of them, what it means is that 2 years ago was a really good year for the pine. It had a heavy uh, set of new foliage, and it kept it all. I rake it. Uh, I haven't raked it yet. We've been kind of occupied doing. We've had three
Other
weeks
things.
of things happening that, how sometimes that just happens that, okay, fine, everything else is happening, might as well add another thing in. But I'll rake all of that into the beds and use it as mulch. It's good mulch. Most of the plants in our shady garden are growing more in the duff, the breaking down needles and pine cones and leaves than they are growing in soil. Um, but the oaks, it's an interesting thing with the oaks that they don't bear heavily every year, and they don't bear in alternate years. Like some apples and crab apples are alternate year bearers. They'll have heavy bloom one year and not so heavy bloom the next year, and it goes on alternate years like that. Oaks are erratic, and the biologists have told me that that's because that is a not because that is a defense against losing all of their acorns to predators. That if every year they had a lot of acorns, because a lot of things eat acorns, chipmunks and squirrels and possums and raccoons and deer
Here and
all eat acorns. So if they drop it every year, they're just going to feed more of their host animals or companion animals. So they do this erratically so that they don't end up being a reliable source of food every single year. And I think that's pretty cool. But we have had to work in, I remember the house near Cranbrook where we had to wear hard hats. I had to run home and get
yeah.
my old hard hats because it was raining down on the cars and on our heads. Yeah, it's a tough year. And while I was thinking about things falling, and a question that we had last week or the week before, Steve, about cottonwood trees dropping their leaves, and was that okay? Do you remember when we were working? I think it was in Troy, and we were making a new bed underneath a big cottonwood tree in front of the house, and we had to cut some roots. There were several roots that I had to saw through because they were very much in the way in the bed and very much heading toward the foundation of the house. And within an hour or so of our cutting the roots, the cottonwood in the middle of summer started dropping leaves on us. Do you remember that?
Vaguely, yes, I think so.
I
Because
think some trees react really quickly to a stress and say, okay, can't keep these leaves and drop them. And this year the cottonwoods were reacting to the drought over a period of time. But I remember sitting back and looking up and going, my gosh, you are like an animal as opposed to a plant that you've responded that quickly to having root loss.
Deb mentions her neighbor is raking his acorns. Is that needed? That's it seems to strike me more of a personal choice, or is he raking them up to put them into bait piles? Acorns attract a lot of animals, like we were saying.
Or you can talk to Nancy, who says that doesn't want any more oak trees coming up in her bed. She's been pulling oak trees like crazy, and they don't pull all that easily with that long root that they develop.
No,
Top even comes up. It's not necessary. They will break down like anything else organic. They don't break down real quickly, and they're not nice to walk on. They can be slippery when they build up in big bunches. But for instance, at the elementary school where my grandkids go, and I drive them up there pretty much every day and drop them off or walk up with them. There's lots of acorns, and for the most part, they fall into the sides of the sidewalk. But everywhere where all these kids have been trampling on them, they're all broken open. We're just looking at the nut from inside the acorn, and it's going to break down that much more quickly.
out in the woods, you'll walk and you'll be under a tree, and all you'll find is cracked shells and caps because the animals have been eating so many acorns right there. And if you're the type of person who hunts, that's where you try to find a spot that you could sit and watch, maybe. And
That reminds me of when we were at Hamilton at the Royal Botanical Garden, and we kept hearing that noise, and we finally identified it as that squirrel sitting over on a stump and chewing his way into black walnuts,
you know,
which is not an easy thing to do.
speaking of, Suzanne was asking, was it a bad year for black walnut? She says she usually has thousands, but this year none. It was a weird year in the spring. They might not have gotten pollinated properly.
And you don't always have a heavy crop on black walnuts, which some people would say it's good. Steve would say it's good. We were walking at the Dearborn U of M Nature Center, and a walnut threw a walnut tree threw a walnut down directly onto Steve's head.
I thought I was being mugged
Yeah, it hurt.
because it hit, you didn't see it, and it was more on the back part of the head.
If you
It
throw
was
one of those walnuts
very
down
strange.
from 30 feet up, it hurts. It hurts to hit that. Um, Carol's asking about pine cones as mulch. Our pine cones do break down. I've put them on. We've had 2 heavy years in a row of pine cones, of heavy pine cones. I mean, wheelbarrows full of pine cones that I pick up and dump into the beds. And they're not solid across the bed anymore. They are breaking down, but they aren't fast to break down. I don't mind looking at them. So, and it's kind of a nice texture. I don't put them everywhere because in some places they compete visually with the plants, but they work pretty well for me. And I don't, well, we could put them through the chipper, couldn't we, Steve? We could
Yep.
chip,
Yeah.
yeah.
As long as they're not new where they still have the resin all over, some of them are have that
They'd
where
gum up your
resin is
blades, wouldn't
dripping.
they?
You don't
Yeah.
want resin in the chipper. Um, our fir cones also seem to get torn apart by the squirrels. So we,
Wait a
we
minute. Wait a minute, Mr. Tree ID person. Fir cones? Fir cones explode on the tree. Yeah.
well,
They don't fall whole. They shatter on the tree and come
they
down.
bring them, they get them from up above and bring them down. And you look
When
around
they're
the
when
trunk of
they're
the tree, that's where they're eating them.
well, they're not ripe yet, yes.
Yeah.
But as a natural thing, all you get on firs are just the midrib is left and all the scales have fallen off as separate pieces. Our
Our
acorns,
acorns, Nancy wants to know, are acorns edible
yeah, yeah,
for
they're
us? Yep.
very good food. And some of them taste a little different than others. I'm thinking that it's the white oak family, the white oak, the swamp white oak, the bur oak. They're a little tastier than the red oak family, but they are edible. And were an important food in medieval times. People
Yep.
would make they would mash them up and use them almost as a flour of some kind. That'd be a good thing to look at. Okay, got to change the picture once in a while, right?
Yep.
Oh, those are
No, nothing else on in chat right now.
okay. And we'll go past the gardens. Um, I've been busy all week long with doing some dividing and transplanting, which means that I've been busy all week long with the imperative of watering. It's normally this is the greatest time to plant things because you get some help from nature and you get moisture, but it's been so dry that it would be it would undo my work transplanting to have all of those divisions dry up. So I've been walking around the yard with buckets of water to water things. This is a coral bell, no, a heucherella. This is a coral bell tiarella hybrid. It was one plant a year ago, and after the end of as of this spring, a year and a half ago, as of this spring, it was looking pretty chunky. And this fall, I said, okay, you're big enough, I can divide you because you're a nice coral bell, probably a patented plant, but I want more of you. So I broke the one up into 8 pieces. And each of those pieces is going to be its own plant. But each of those pieces has very little root on it right now. They need to stay moist in order to grow root and hold themselves in the ground. So I put them together and each one has a little divot around it. And I walk by every day with a bucket of water and I put 2 gallons of water on those 8 plants. So each of those plants gets what, a quart of water every day. And
Yep.
I'll do that for a week at least. And then I'll back off to watch and see if it's going to start raining. Please let it start raining. Um, on,
Soon.
on things that I divide and they have no top left now. So there's bloodroot in here. I've thrown my gloves down so I can take a picture. If you can see where there are crossed sticks, pieces of mulch, I've crossed them. There's 5 blood roots planted in here. 1, 2, 3, whoops, 4, and 5. And those are marking for me where to put my water because I can't see otherwise. And those darn squirrels dug one of them up already. Now, come spring, I won't have to worry about knowing where they are. If they survive, I'll have greenery to show me where they are. But I do mark them in one way or another so that I can know where to water and water just that plant. Squirrels are awful. They come and say, "Oh, look, somebody made these nice little crosses back here."
Why did they dig here?
Yeah, what are you supposed to be doing here? Um,
Nancy says weather says maybe rain on Sunday.
yeah, there's a chance of rain in Cleveland too for the game. Speaking of dividing, I might as well get into this
Do
here
it.
because it is a great time to divide. Um, and as I thought about dividing while I was working on dividing things and planting things that we divided as part of last Saturday's webinar, I thought, oh, we forgot to say, we forgot to say, we forgot to say. So I'll tell you about dividing. I was dividing some plants and Steve took a picture of a little collection I had going here. I'll show you these individually, but all these different roots are all telling me how they want to be divided and what we want to do with them. The ginger makes a sod. You can just take a spade like I did and cut 4 times and then lift up a sod of ginger. Makes a great ground cover. I really do like our native ginger for that. It has a naked bud, like a viburnum. So see, here's next year's bud sitting at ground level. It's basically a folded, not filled up with water leaf ready to grow. And what happens over time is all of those new extensions with buds at the end wrap over the top of each other, kind of like bearded iris do and other plants that grow by rhizomes, and they start crowding each other out. So this grows even faster if you divide it up to where this piece has its own place to grow roots, separate from this piece, which has its own place to grow roots. I'm putting them, there's a place where our sweet woodruff, which has become a great ground cover in a couple places, I let some grass get started in there. And I'm going to dig out the area where the grass is and put put the ginger in there because it's big leaf with the sweet woodruff little leaf, fine leaf will be a nice combination. And I'd rather plant small pieces like that than dig up big chunks to put in. Some
Does European ginger grow the same way?
exactly the same way. Maybe not as vigorously. It doesn't spread as quickly, but
Yeah, Michelle asked that question. Sorry.
yep, exactly the same pattern. This is a wood poppy, our native Caledonium stylophora. No, it's not Caledonium. Caledonium is a weedy. We don't want that one. This is
Yeah,
stylophora.
not that one.
And it's got a woody crown with buds for next year set in various places next to the stems that were there. So I've cut the stems off. Here's a cut stem. There's a cut stem back there and a bud right here. There's a bud right there. And the crown itself is real hard. Chuck Martin in our webinar sawed through that for me. You can also use a shovel and cut it out. But each piece of that crown, we could divide it even smaller. As long as it's got roots, a piece of the crown with buds on it, it's going to grow. This is bleeding heart. Everybody's always worried about bleeding heart. I have one client who says, "Oh, don't mess with it. It's so big." Well, it'll spread. It's got mostly they've gone dormant, especially in a dry year like now. Sometimes they make it through the summer with leaves still green, but this year, because it was dry, they just laid down and went away. But they've got a kind of a brittle, it's a funny root. It always looks wizened and like it's going away. And the buds are a little hard to find. There's a bud right there. There's a bud right there. There's a bud right over here. So you can just break apart any part of that root and you've got another plant to grow. Just keep the buds up. Geranium has a running root. It runs underground. This is the big root geranium. And the mother plant, which is much bigger actually than this, has a runner that goes out to the side and will even lay on the ground and root and become a new plant. In fact, I've often taken divisions of perennial geranium without taking the geranium out of the ground. I just reach underneath the plant, scrape some soil away, find one of those thick roots, and pull it up and divide it because they just lay on the ground and root, and then a new plant starts from there, from the buds that are there. See the little white bud starting there? That was what this one was, and it's grown up. There's little buds right there. Every place where there's a leaf, there's also a bud that could be there's a bud. Every one of those nodes can grow roots. You can just put it in the ground and let it keep growing. This is our native coral bell, Heuchera villosa. It's a big plant. That's why I've got my my boot in the picture. And this is half of the plant already pulled apart. It's got a lot of debris in it because the sumac above it is dropping leaves and everything else is dropping leaves and it's building up in there. But the main plant, the original plant, is this woody vertical piece. And those are some of its larger roots at the bottom that were spread out to the side. But that vertical piece, just like the geranium, has eyes, and those eyes are growing off separate. So the clump becomes bigger like this, and I can break off any of those pieces and have a separate plant. It has buds that can be leaf or can grow as root if I put that in the ground. And I'm going to take these pieces off and cut off the oldest leaves. So I'll cut this leaf off and this leaf off and that one that's probably a flower stalk off. I'll clip those and I'll take the debris that's a sumac leaf out of there and end up with some pieces that I can plant. And as long as they've got a bud, and as long as I keep them in moist soil, they will develop into something just like the mother plant will. And I took that plant apart and made 21 pieces out of it. I wanted small, I could have planted larger pieces. That's all the debris and leaves that I cut off. I could have made them into larger pieces, like that central piece. But I would prefer to plant smaller plants. I can get them into the ground more quickly, and I can do that without disturbing trees. These are going to grow underneath trees, and I'd rather not dig big holes and disturb more tree roots. So each of these is another division, and I'm clearing an area along our driveway. I've told you about this before. This is the annual native called dayflower. And we had some there, so I let it go to seed, and it covers the area. It's a living mulch for us. I just thin it out around there's a beech tree there and a bay. I thin it out in the spring so that it's not choking everything out. And that's been holding that area for us without having to use extra mulch. But I started a ground cover there. There's the dwarf Solomon seal, Polygonatum humili, and it's been growing fine underneath. It was underneath all of these plants that I'm beginning to dig out. I'm just listening with a fork and pulling them out. They're annuals, but I'm getting them out of the way, clearing an area where I can put those 21 divisions of coral bells. Took me an hour and 20 minutes to clear this area. And then I planted those coral bells by inserting the spade. And I inserted the spade. Let's see if I can. I have found that people don't quite understand what I mean by radially. So I'm going to draw here, got a pencil. So that little beech tree is precious to us. We started it as a little 18-inch piece, and it's now a 5-foot tree spreading out nicely, and we want it to be there. So I put this, every place that I made a slit to put in one of those coral bells, I oriented the spade this way, as if the spade was roots coming out radially from the trunk, because I'm much less likely to cut a main root when I turn my spade the same way the roots are running. So when you're working underneath trees, think about that. Think about the fact that most of the plants that grow well underneath trees grow by rhizomes, like the geranium does, or the ginger does, or like this coral bell does, by offsets that if there's enough debris built up on the soil, then those buds that could be leaves are buried and become new roots and new side plants. So if you think about that as a situation that is happening underneath trees, starting with smaller plants gets you a faster take. Oops. I guess when you annotate, you also have to. Uh-oh. Janet, you should practice these things before you try it. There you go. So I left the area near the beach clear. I don't want to hide that trunk of that tree and place them all between it and the next beech in the row. And I'll keep clearing the dayflower. We'll keep some of it because the pollinators like it, but we'll go with other ground covers, a variety of ground covers in that area. And if I'm planting something like this is the golden satin grass, it also has a rhizome. You can see that, and it's quite woody, almost like bamboo. So it grew out in this direction and in this direction. And the easiest way to plant that would be to clip this right here and plant this piece by itself. But no matter what you do on a plant like that, the roots are spread out wide, and I had to dig bigger holes. I had to disturb more soil to get them into the ground. So you don't want to clump those roots up and put them next to each other. You might as well clip the roots then, because if you clump them up or twist them up, two things happen. If I double these roots underneath themselves, they're not going to grow well and they're going to compete with each other. If I put them in and leave the tips of the roots pointed upward, then the plant will not grow, the root will not grow well. When the roots are pointed upward instead of either level or down, various hormones build up in the root tips and slow down the growth. So you'd be better if you wanted to dig a small hole to just clip the roots here and put those roots into a smaller hole. This is sweet Sicily, which is Myrrhis odorata. It smells like licorice, and it looks ferny and does not spread as badly as ferns do. and I wanted a ferny texture in where some hostas are. So I put Sweet Sicily in. It is a member of the carrot family, and you can see how much its fruit looks like a carrot. It will do some spreading, mostly by seed, but it'll also spread to a certain extent by some side pieces that come off of those bigger roots. I have to erase what I wrote, and I have to find where the eraser is. Got my eraser. Clear. There we go. Clear all drawing. There, get rid of those blue lines. So if you look at this, whoops, I've got my pencil back again. Oh wait. If you look at this root right here and look closer at it, there's a bud right there at the top. And there actually are buds all over on the root so that you could cut this root into pieces and let it grow. And there are buds on this root that got forced sideways. And so more plants could come up from there. Those are easy to put back in the ground because you just cut off a piece of root and slice them in vertically. See the bud right there. And there's another bud right there. Very vigorous plants. Something like bloodroot, which also grows with rhizomes. And this is a double bloodroot. We were talking about this in our webinar last Saturday, and after the webinar, Chuck and I were talking some more about it because double bloodroot is sterile. So if you have double bloodroot, it doesn't seed itself around as a double. It generally doesn't even get pollinated and make seed. You propagate it by making divisions. But this double bloodroot showed up in our garden, and Chuck said, but I understood that it came from North Carolina and it was just a chance find. I said, well, if it could happen once, it could happen again, and it seems to have happened here. Now, I don't want that double bloodroot to do what happened in one garden that I know where there was a big clump of double bloodroot, and it's beautiful, all those extra petals, and they bloom for longer than the single bloodroot does. But she was afraid to do anything to it. She didn't want to mess with it. And what happened one year was a fungus got into the crown and killed the whole thing, and she had nothing. I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to move it around a little bit. So I took a big chunk of it out of the ground. It was a good 18 inches across the chunk, and I took this part off. I cut right here and cut it loose. So there's a large, what was one of these smaller rhizomes is now a bigger, thicker rhizome, and it's growing off to the sides. And these are now competing with each other. They're growing roots. There's roots growing from this one you can see right there. And they're going to grow faster if we break them apart. And when you break them apart, they show you why they're called bloodroot. There's the bloody sap that comes out. It's not toxic, but it looks crazy. And I spread those bloodroots out over a space about, let's see, there's the mother plant over there, and there are 6 more pieces in here in a space about 4 feet long and then 2.5 feet wide. So they've got lots of room. And then I put some bloodroots in another part of the yard. And when I put them in and they're invisible like that because they had no leaves on them, until I'm done watering them, I leave some sticks or something. It doesn't have to be permanent. So they're marking where there's a couple pieces of epimedium, which has that same kind of root without leaves on it. And I also take pictures of where I put transplants and divisions because invariably I forget by spring that I put something there. I'm infamous for planting areas 2 and 3 times because it looks empty to me. And I actually planted something there already. So I take a picture and I try to include in that picture, you saw earlier these heucherellas put in the ground, but they were just the heucherellas and mulch. I try to put something in the picture like the base of the locust tree so that I remember where they are relative to something that I can locate the next spring. And you might think about doing that same kind of thing. So look for the plants and see what they have. There's a woody crown on Persicaria virginiana, formerly Tavara virginiana, or jump seed, which looks so pretty in the late fall with its red seed pods on the sprays at the top of the plant. But it's another crown that you can slice through and make them as small as you want. They've all got buds. There's a bud sitting right there. You can also tell whether a plant likes your yard or not by taking a look at how many buds, what kind of energy level it has. So if each stem has only 1 bud at its base, it's just getting by. If each stem has 4 or 5 buds at the base, then you know that it's multiplying itself and it must like it where it is. Solomon seal, polygonatum. Um, Such a cool plant. What we forgot to say during the webinar when we were talking about dividing this plant is that when we put these back in the ground and I put these pieces, you can break off any one of these pieces. And just like an iris, the bigger the piece, the more likely it is that it's going to have a good sized leaf on it and a good flower. When you put those pieces in, orient them all with the buds going out in the same direction. Because if you put them in helter-skelter, the stems will come up helter-skelter, pointed in different directions. So Steve did a wonderful job at one house one time. She was just amazed at how beautifully the plants came up looking all the same way. And it's called Solomon seal. The Solomon seals are because where this stem is attached, when that dehisces and falls off this year, it will leave a mark like back here. And that mark is as if someone took their wax, their ring with the seal of the king's seal, and sealed hot wax or pressed in hot wax to mark an official closure of an envelope or a document of some kind. So that's the Solomon seal that shows up on those plants.
Hmm.
Yeah. Uvularia or Marybell's, Fairy Bell's, Bellwort has told me that it likes it there. There's 4 stems right there and a good 12 new buds coming up. I said, okay, Marybell's likes it and I like Marybell, so I'm going to divide it and make more of them. And I can put in this chunk, or I can make it smaller and say I'll put in that piece with its 3 or 4 buds by itself, with or without the stem that's attached to it. Whoops. And I made that Marybell's into 5 pieces. So I think I planted a total of about 100 new plants from about 10 plants that I dug up to divide. What's been going on in chat here, Steve?
Valerie is asking, when planting shrubs at a property line, is there any law or rule that says how close they should be planted? Is there a requirement for space left for the plant to mature?
We had an entire webinar, and next Tuesday at the Rochester Library, if you're around in that area, we're doing that presentation for the Rochester Library sponsored group about planting along the property line. There's no rule, but there are social and practical reasons to not have your shrub get so big that it crosses over the line, because once it crosses over the line, the neighbor has every right to do to it what he wants or she wants to do to it. So finding out how big your shrub is going to be at maturity and placing it so that it will not cross the line is probably your best bet. But there's no hard and fast rule. And we spent a good hour describing all the different considerations that you might want to go through.
You could be a member of a homeowners association that may have rules that you might have to look out for. And some townships and cities might have something, but not that I can
Not legally. Diane asked about, what do you mean about putting the Solomon seal all in one direction? So these are Solomon seal roots with that bud, that sharp point sticking up. Do have them all radiate from one place or aim in one direction. Don't put one in this way, because that one will face the wrong way, at least its first year. All right, so I want to put them all oriented the same way. The light next year, the strength of the sunlight will get them all turned in pretty much the same way. But that first year that they come up, they'll come up helter-skelter and they won't have the beautiful alignment that they would otherwise.
There was a question answered in chat by Janine asked about finding bugs on her basil and butterfly weed. They were orange body with black markings, and Karen told her to look at a website to identify the milkweed bug.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Who sent
It's
the picture? Jean Anandovich just sent us a picture. It was too late to share with everybody here, but she texted a picture of orange and black bugs on the milkweed, and it definitely is milkweed, the milkweed bugs that
Yep.
they're in almost final stage of development. Not a big problem. It's a an insect that goes with the plant, and some years there's a lot of them, and some years there's not, and it's no big deal. They're not life-threatening.
Suzanne was asking, are coral bells rabbit food? Not the ones Janet was showing around here.
Yeah, the Heuchera villosa with the fuzzy leaf doesn't tend to get eaten so much, and I have been hearing from people that some of the hybrids between the Heucheras and the Tiarellas used at least one breeder in France was heavily using Heuchera villosa to get a fuzzier leaf, and that those were not being eaten as much as the others. But I've not tested that myself. I do know that our Heuchera villosa doesn't get touched. The deer and the rabbits have not messed with it at all. But we don't have a huge deer and rabbit problem because we have coyotes in the neighborhood and because we appear to be in I, we're we have enough sunflowers that the deer seem to like those and they go elsewhere to eat other people's things so far anyway.
Diane Anderson is saying I foolishly planted a tulip tree 2 years ago. It is now about 15 feet tall. I realize that it is too near to my septic field and I need to move it. How far from the trunk should I start digging to preserve as many roots as possible? If I keep it watered, is there a good chance of it surviving?
Well, how big is the trunk now? Because tulip trees grow, and I hope we're talking about tulipifera. What's its name, Steve? It's got a long
Well, if
name.
it's 15 feet tall in 2 years, chances are
It's a tulip tree.
the tulip tree, not a magnolia. So,
Then if it's 15 feet tall, it's got roots going out at least 15 feet in all directions. If you can prune the roots first, you got a better chance of moving that without having long-term repercussions because A, it's got to hold itself up, which it's going to have trouble doing with the roots truncated. And B, if you cut the roots where they're large, big in diameter, um, close to the trunk, the root is likely to get some rot in it, and that rot will go up in the trunk, and the trunk will then have a cavity in it, which makes the trunk not strong. So I would root prune it first. You could go around, you could go all the way around the plant and stab with your spade to make a dashed line around the outside in an area big enough for you that you think you can move those roots. Or you can cut one side of the roots now, and you can cut another side of the roots next spring and then move it next fall, and that would be its best bet. But 15 feet tall is that's a big plant to be trying to move and keep it from having a lot of root damage. But you knew it grew fast. They don't the first year, but the tulip poplar that we put in for our son's house right on the edge of the water so that they'll have something to help hold the bank. Um, it sat, and we said, well, but it's a tulip poplar. It grew about 5 feet last year, and that's not unusual for them to grow that far. So maybe you can just start with a new one. Um, it was a great week for night lights. I hope other people went out looking at the northern lights because when it comes to being jealous of southern gardeners, they don't get the chance to see what we northerners in New England and the Great Lakes get to see. Our friends were up at Whitefish Point, which is the bump in the Upper Peninsula that sticks into Lake Superior, just west of Sault Ste. Marie. And this is what they were seeing up there with the freighter going by. I mean, those are beautiful, undulating green and pink and white lights. And even here, this is in our neighborhood. This is our grandkid. What our grandkids saw was a sky that was lit late at night and had purples and greens in it. My neighbor right next door took this picture of it last night. I think her camera may have enhanced it a little bit, but it's gorgeous. I forgot to go out. We actually told people about the Northern Lights and said, it's supposed to be really good to see them right now. And both Steve and I forgot to go out and look. But the sunrises, this is a sunrise from Tuesday or Wednesday. They were glorious this year. I think being outside, we see more of this. We gardeners do than other people do. They don't notice the sky, they don't notice the moon, they don't notice the lights at night.
what day and time is the Rochester Public Library? Tuesday, I know.
It is Tuesday, and I believe it's at 6:30. It might be 6 o'clock. You can check on the library's
You
website.
probably should call them because they may require reservations sometimes.
Yeah, they've got a fairly big room, but they do have a list that they write people's names on, so that in case they have too many, they can tell people we're full up in the room. Yeah,
Nancy has a hand up.
go ahead, Nancy. Join our conversation.
Hi, Janet, Stephen. Um,
Hello.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. Earlier this week, David and I were at Telly's, wandering through their nursery. And actually, it was a marvelous mini fall color tour with all the Japanese maples turning different colors.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. But as we were looking at tags on a couple of crab trees, we noticed a special tag that said right root. And so I asked the fellow working there what that meant, and he said that one of their suppliers is working to develop this crab tree, or has developed this crab tree. And I can't remember if it suckers much less or doesn't sucker at all.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. And it's about time.
Yeah.
That M110 rootstock that they use is just a nasty thing on a lot of crab apples. Good to thank you for telling us about that right root.
Right root. Mhm.
I bet they've patented the plant that they're growing it from. That's good to hear. And I can't help but laugh that you just happen to be wandering through Tully's. You're the couple who a night out for the Randalls is to go wander through a nursery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Diane had a comment to the other Diane in Waterville had a comment to Diane about the root. They had to remove their tulip tree because the roots infiltrated all the beds. Our backyard is a standard subdivision backyard, I would say. Well, it's too small for it. Yep, they're big trees.
Big trees. They're definitely very big trees, and you can't stop them. Yeah, many years ago when I was wondering about septic fields, I talked to I forgot his name. Tudoroff. I talked to George Tudoroff, who was the son of the man who started Tudoroff Brothers Septic Service. He was then 70 something, and his sons were taking over. So it's a third generation septic service. And I said, you should probably know. I said, I am told that we shouldn't plant trees on or near septic fields, but I'm drawing designs for people whose houses are built in the woods. And basically, they took down 10 trees and built a house there. So it's surrounded by trees. There's going to be roots getting into it. What George told me was that every septic field is going to need some service in 20 or 25 years. But you don't want fast growing trees planted by it because fast growing trees had fast growing roots. He said, I grow crab apples right next to my own septic field and bushes. That's not a problem. He said, my wife put a maple tree on the side and it's going to have an accident. And I think tulip poplars would feel the same way.
They would definitely fit once established. It's after 8.
Is it really? God, the time just flies. It's nice to be here with you all. And I will take you through a success story that Carrie sent in. She put her amaryllis outside for the summer and watered it when she happened to think of it. And a while ago decided that she wanted to put it in the dark and see if it would bloom again. And after about 4 or 6 weeks, she pulled it out from where she put it into the dark, and it had a 10-inch white stem coming. And she thought she'd killed it, but it greened up, and look at it blooming right now. Isn't that gorgeous? We can do these things. And this week at the Waterford Library, where we were admiring how beautiful our combinations look this year, we had Peyton helping us. She's been learning very, very well the names of the plants and being able to identify them. When we tell her to deadhead all the Angelonia, she knows which plant she's looking for. It's so great to have young gardeners to work with. And it's a good thing to think about if you've got a good combination that worked well. In this case, the bicolor blue Angelonia with garden heliotrope, and behind it, you can't see it, blue ageratum was a spectacular combination. Everybody loved that combination. You want to try to take pictures of it so that you remember it next year or 5 years from now when you want to try it again. Okay, I think we are ready to go. Go out and sit in the garden. As the days get short, it gets hard to even think about losing our time to be out in the garden. For me, I've got at least a week's worth of raking to do out there. So that's it for Free for All Friday number 21. The next time we'll do this will be a week from now, October 18th. Sonia tells me that she has got her garden pictures from Germany and Austria put together and she would like to show them. So we'll have Sonia with us next Friday. And that's it for the night then. Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. See you later.
Yep.
Have a good evening.
See you in a week or so.